As part of Farmpeat's community outreach programme, Love Your Wellies, we aim to tell the story of the Midlands peat landscape through art. With this in mind, I travelled to Kells in County Meath on Saturday 18th November to attend Textures, Tales and Tastes of the Bog, an event of the collaborative arts project Nahoga na Durha. The project foregrounds the importance of community relationships with the living world for climate and biodiversity action. It's led by Carley County Council Arts Office in partnership with Kildare and Meath County Council Arts Offices. In this video, we'll hear from the artists Kate Flood, Jules Michael and Monica de Bath as they discuss the objects displayed during their event: a bog cabinet of curiosities, a butter firkin and a granger's hut plus weaving frames respectively. We'll also learn about Ireland's moths with naturalist Timothy Sullivan and the potential of tourism on peatlands with Lawrence Fulham of the Community Wetlands Forum. You can learn more about Nahoga na Durha by clicking the links in the video description.
My interest in bogs, I suppose, to start with, was the plants, because I worked at the Botanic Gardens and I studied a little bit of botany, and I just became absolutely fascinated with these bog plants, everything from cranberries and bilberries to the sphagnum mosses that you see here, builds the bog. And I suppose one thing I would say, a healthy bog is a wet bog. If you remember one thing from today, that is it. And bogs are made up of three things: peat soil, plants and water. And it's like one of those kind of little tripods. If you take away any one of those, the bog becomes degraded and unhealthy, and it doesn't store the carbon and, support as much biodiversity. I suppose in Ireland a lot of our bogs are degraded, and you have this healthy sphagnum here, and then you have this is what we have used Ireland's bogs for. It's kind of hard to believe that this sphagnum moss becomes this turf, but that's because it dries out, and once you drain the bog of all the water, you can cut the bog for turf. And I suppose over the years in Ireland we've gone from that real economic need for turf and for industry in the Midlands to thinking of different ways of engaging with the bog. And as we were talking about earlier, who else lives there? And you've got the frogs and the dragonflies and the lovely moths that Timothy has there. Timothy is an entomologist local to Gurley, and he breeds moths, and he's very, very knowledgeable.
So I have here the emperor moth, which is Ireland's only silk moth species. It's actually very unique looking among our Irish moths in general. There's no other species that looks quite like it. We also have the oak egger, which feeds on headers, and the reason it's called that is actually because the cocoon looks like an acorn. Together with the fox moth, the oak egger actually forms the main food for the cuckoos when they first arrive in Ireland in the middle of April. As they're the first big caterpillars to come out of hibernation, and they're just at the right size for the cuckoo to feed as they arrive in to Ireland. We also have the ghost moths here, which actually rely on grassland and meadows, and these are one of the species that's harmed by intensive agriculture and cereal farming, as a lot of the pesticides that are sprayed leach into the plants and actually kill the caterpillars within the soil. And there's also not enough wildflowers in the meadows, which these caterpillars actually feed on the roots of, since they rely on things like sorrel and clover to feed on the roots of. And of course we have the smaller moths, which feed on many low-growing plants like nettles, dock leaves, and a lot of people would consider these weeds, but in fact these are very important for our moths, which in turn feed our birds, small mammals such as hedgehogs. And again, the elephant hawk moth, which is the bright pink one, that a lot of people love. That one's damaged by ground clearing. The caterpillars feed on rosebay willow herb, which grows on rough ground, and when that's cleared and destroyed in the winter time, the pupae, which actually lie on the soil surface and the leaf layer, are actually often destroyed or killed, and that can actually lead to quite significant drops in local populations of this very iconic species within Ireland. The main pressures facing Irish moths is actually the loss of food plants and the habitat for those plants, since their caterpillars rely on very specific plants to feed on. And when these plants are actually gone, the moths can no longer breed, and therefore the population will go extinct if there's no plants. And with conservation of bogs and other peatland sites, and ensuring that those plants are able to grow there and able to thrive. It means that these species can lay their eggs on these plants and the cycle can continue unbroken. Well, the best thing that actually people can do for themselves, like on their own, is actually leaving parts of their garden wild and just letting sort of wildflowers come up. They are very, very, very important for our native insects and therefore our mammals and birds that feed on those insects. And with the moth trapping, the way it really works is it's a bucket basically, or a box with a light mounted on top of it, and a perspex, either a funnel or sort of an inverted cone that directs the moths into it, and it's full of egg cartons, and the moths actually sit on the egg cartons and they rest there until the morning, unharmed obviously, and then you can monitor them and record what has been caught over the night. And after a few years, a picture can be sort of drawn of generally what's in the area, what's new, and population trends, and in general how the species is doing in the area. Most of my work is done on Gurley Bog. That's where I conduct most of my surveys and where a lot of my specimens actually come from. We restored it by blocking a lot of the drains. There was also bunding done, which a lot of the cut bog and cutaway bog is actually starting to be restored, and that's providing great habitat for not just moths but also wintering birds. We're starting to see a huge increase in teal, mallard, jack snipe even, and snipes overwintering in these sites because they have a new habitat. And again, of course, the wet grass area is great for the willows, great for the hawk moths that are growing there. And sure enough, I was there this summer with the black light because, interestingly enough, caterpillars of these large moths actually glow under UV light, and they can be surveyed by walking the bog at night with a black light and shining it on the bushes. And there was a lot of hawk moth caterpillars on these bushes in this area, which is great to see because it means the population of them is thriving, and it shows a good sign for next summer when these caterpillars will be moths and will be flying around.
So my name is Jules and I'm the artist representing Carlow. I have a studio practice, but I also work with community groups, and our little Carlow bog is very much an outlier in the context of the big Midland bogs. It's only a little squirt of about 20 acres, I think, and it's been quite small and hidden. It was cut over a lot up until after the emergency, and then again a little bit in the 70s, and then it's just been lying there fallow and quite hidden. And over the last 6 to 8 years, a voluntary group, the Drummond Bog Project, has got involved in trying to conserve it and preserve it. And as part of that, that's how I'm here really, because we've been doing art projects in the community, in the schools, and in various guises through Creative Ireland, and then in with Nahoga Nadertha. It's been wonderful. That's what peatlands do. It kind of loops us in and loops us out. So my particular thing, I'm interested in how Drummond is so small, and so I tend to use this old artefact of it's a butter firkin, and I'd say it's about 120 years old. So there would have been more recent ones that would have come out of co-ops, and a firkin was a standard weight, and butter would have been made in the community, and if your farm was big enough, you would have managed to fill a whole firkin, which I think is 54 pounds of butter. Otherwise, it happened very much as a community effort. So you would have made your butter at the end of the week, and you would have come together within your community, and it would have been packed into the firkin, and you would have been paid for the 3 or 4 pounds that you put in. And then everybody would have got their wages out of it as such, and then when the firkins were full, they were dispatched from that area down to the butter market in Cork. It was out of that I started to look into old habits. I mean, it keys right back into bog butter, which is a whole, since Bronze Age, communities have been burying butter in bogs, and we're not quite sure whether that was for as a kind of a votive ritual thing, or whether it was storage, because bogs were cool places. And I think probably this might have been a mixture of both, because I kind of reflect back to my childhood when I was very young. My grandmother didn't have a fridge, but she had a dairy, which was a small room which was north facing, and the window was jacked open with a meat safe. And my mum actually bought her a fridge, but kind of Granny didn't use it. There was a cold marble slab, so the milk would come in and be put into a crock on the marble slab. So we would go down to see Granny on a Saturday, and she would say, "I'll get some cream," and she'd go down and with a teaspoon skim off the cream off the top. Just in thinking about that, and thinking that's Granny scooping a teaspoon of cream off at the end of the week, you know, we take so much for granted. So when I started to look into this, I actually made some butter from a carton of cream. I buy it in my local butcher because there's a farmer in North Carlow who's got together with some other farmers and they're selling organic milk or Jersey milk. I try to buy that milk if I can and support a local producer. And so this butter is actually 300 millilitres of cream, so it's this and a bit more. And then I got this Kilner jobby on the internet and put in my 300 litres of cream, and you do this for 10 minutes. So when you open it, it's split. So you see this sort of liquidy stuff in there?
Yeah.
That's buttermilk or whey, which then goes on to be fed to calves or back in the day. So you tip off the whey, and this fat basically that's left is butter. So I'm kind of really interested in how long. So I'm going, now I know why butter is expensive. It also makes me think about the value of time, which is why I brought this. So this I found where I live. I've been living for 20 years, and when I was making my vegetable garden, I found this in the ditch. And it actually, I do remember one, again, going back to my grandmother in the cowshed in her place. And the prongs on this would have been this long originally. And through the man going in every morning and scooping out the old straw and the cow muck along the stones, the prongs would have got shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, until one day he was going, that fork is no use to me, so he threw it out. But I keep it. It actually sits in my sitting room. It's one of my prized possessions, because I think about time and how, you know, that was valued. It was forged just down the road from me, and they would have used it and used it and used it. So on the back of that then, it's like, if you have butter, you need bread. So this is a loaf of bread. There's a young man who's he's converted part of his dad's hay shed into a bakery, and he's built himself, based on a European model, a brick oven so that he can make his bread on site, and he gets the wood from another local farmer about 30 miles away, and he's just, this is Seamus's bread, he's just brought in a hand mill, well, it's electric, but it can mill 15 kilos of flour in half an hour. So last year he grew an acre of wheat, and he's milled it himself. He makes the bread and he sells again in the local butcher newspaper shop. He has a circuit, so he's created a closed circle, and I just think there's something interesting about that, and people trying to negotiate food and food production and the value of food in a rural community. But I also have cheese, which is also made by a local producer. She's actually been making cheese for 20 years and selling it in Carlow Market. So this cheese has nettles in, and it's made from organic milk that she gets from another farmer actually in Meath. She also makes a sheep's cheese. She brought in 69 sheep from France, a special breed that have a high fat content in the milk, 10 years ago or so, and she was milking them herself. She's a farmer's daughter. The only people now she can find to help her is a Syrian couple who have moved to the area, and it's because it's within their culture that she can find that support. So you might wonder, where is all this going, because it's got nothing to do with the bog. But personally, I think it does, because this is a screen grab courtesy of Google of Drummond Bog, which is its little 20 acres, and it's surrounded by farmland. And no bog is an island, because the critters and the spores must travel outside the bog and up through the hedgerows and the ditches. So the Black Stairs are on one side and the River Barrow is up there. So that's what I think when I'm looking at the bog, that it is so site specific and so beautiful, but it also has this other story. So it's the same thing for this. I think this is part of the story, but then to take it right back to the bog, when you gather some leaves and you spend some time looking at them and take out some colours, and I stripped it right out to just the colours, and it's kind of, that's downy birch, that's a little leaf, that's just the stem of a rowan. So it just looks great.
When you sit and you look at something and you start to paint just the colours and you strip out everything else, like having a leaf beside you and looking at it and going, oh, that's yellow and green. And then you spend some time with it and you start to see that it has all these other tones and values.
And then what I've also done is I have stamps there, so you can make a little stamp and make a postcard and post it to somebody.
All I'll just say about the Cabinet of Curiosities is, you know, it was a way for, I suppose, rich merchants to show off their all the plundering of nature that went on in Victorian times and in the past. And it's not the same, obviously, as being in the bog and, you know, being in the healthy ecosystem, but it's thinking of all the ways, I suppose, that we could engage. And I've left these little hand lenses for you to take a look at some of the plants up close and just see some of the adaptations that they make. But what I would invite you to do is just have a little explore, pick an object that has some meaning for you, or that you just are interested in or want to know more about, and draw a little postcard, leave it there, and I hope to put these all online eventually. What I'll be doing while Monica's weaving and Jules is painting is offering you some plant teas and some moss cake.
This is the sphagnum that I use just when I go around the schools. But what you see is also, you see the shell marrow. So it's amazing to look at the shell marrow. So that's down at the base. So it's amazing to see what's down under, and then this is sphagnum when it dries out. And I guess you all know the healing properties of sphagnum, that it was used in World War I. And one of the last classes that I had before COVID hit, there was a sense that something was happening, and there was a young girl came into the class and she had a mask on her, and I was talking about the healing properties of sphagnum, and she shot her hand up and she said, "Can it heal COVID?" You know, so just very poignant. So what I'm doing today is I'm doing the thing of weaving. That there was a man who came down from Donegal, from Glencolmkill, from the Gaeltacht, to work on the camps years and years and years ago. And the interesting thing was I ended up meeting him at an archaeology course in Glencolmkill. And he knew I was involved in the arts, and he said, is there any chance we could revive the spinning, the natural dyeing and the weaving, in terms of just the hand stuff? And we sat down together, and he really drove it, and he was bringing me around to the different houses where you had the people who still had the spinning skills. And most of these people were well over 60, 70, 80. So we went through, we succeeded, we linked with Idris Gael, and we managed to pull off a great project which still has its remnants up in Glencolmkill and through Idris Gael. This is an example of a sample that tells a story. I learnt my weaving, believe it or not, from a Zimbabwean when I was working out in Zimbabwe for a few years. And this is all to do with the colours and the land, and a lot of it is natural dyes. This one here, a mixture of cottons and, believe it or not sheep's wool, but goat's wool. There's a choice of different sorts of wools. There might be cotton scraps there. And then this is the heather from the bog out in Rathangan, and it's a good year and a half old. So that means that it will actually stay very much as it is. And you can see here in the old Zimbabwean one, there's actually a bit of sisal in there some places. There's different bits and pieces that you can actually look and see. You might even have a few leaves in your pocket. You might be able to steal a few from Jules down there. That there are different things around the place which maybe are from your area. So we have people from all over the world here. Isn't that great? Yeah. And links with all over the world. Okay, so it's really nice to actually see that thing of the cultures weaving.
We have had discussions within the Community Wetlands Forum around, including more marginalised voices and, just improving the diversity of faces and voices that are involved in this kind of work. And there's huge opportunities there when you look at organisations like Sanctuary in Nature. There's a lot more that can be done.
Paris Drop was a project that was done with the Guamla Artists Collective. The specific project I was involved in was an outdoors garden space where I linked in with people who had been living possibly for 5-6 years and rearing their family within the direct provision centre in Galway. And they were from all over the place, and they had actually, a lot of them had green fingers, so they really wanted to be able to grow some of the food that they'd like to eat because they didn't get a chance to cook where they were either. So it was that whole thing of trying to grow things that you could eat raw.
So as a collaborative eco-social artist, it's very much a framework where there's science, community and creativity in very broad terms. These really, really rich and deep layers that can go out as wide as you want and back in again. And I think that's one of the amazing things about peatlands, is that it has this ability to connect.
I think we have had a tendency in conservation to focus on the environment and the ecosystem and the science and all of that, instead of looking at the relationships between people and the environment and how we can, support those. And that's the whole social and the ecological, bringing those two together and nurturing those connections to nature. There isn't a strong culture of participation in Ireland, and that's a broader problem than just peatlands and bogs, or a broader issue. But there is a lot of work being done, but it has to happen at all scales. And there is still a sense in the conversations that as communities, they're not always given an equal place at the table, because there is this kind of top-down culture in Ireland.
Given that Gordon Mona was involved at a time when we needed it, they cut away, that they were beginning to cut away, but we're at the stage now where hopefully we're looking at rehabilitation. We have a lovely piece of raised bog still in the Midlands, and I had no space to work when my kids were small, and I managed to negotiate a workspace in Gordon Mona workspace just outside Rathanga, and I was finding things like old teapots as I went around, and I began, while my main focus was painting, I was beginning to get to know a lot of the people who were working there at the time. And this is what I discovered. I discovered that this is just a very simple, sort of like a pictogram nearly. There's a remnant which has got an amazing set of at least 6 to 7, maybe 8 sphagnum species still alive and breathing. And it was the ecology team actually have done a bit of re-wetting around it, and they have blocked the drains. So we are very hopeful as a community that this will survive, that this remnant Clonrusk, it's between Kildare and Offaly. So we need to that whole thing of the strategic stuff of working with the various county councils. It's so important because land doesn't know any borders. Just to the local bog of Greater Rathanga Mehel, and the notion of Keala, Codleen and Chuck, as we were talking about already, that who else lives here, that a lot of our work would be within the context of Community Wetlands Forum, and there was a really interesting pulling together yesterday around community tourism, and we have a wonderful project close to us in Lullymore Heritage, and it has developed its own thing within the area, and very much with people who would have come the first trawl from all over the island, particularly Gaeltachts, people who are used to using schlans, the 1940s and then the 1950s, and then Gordon Mona. So we have all of that context and history within the area of the Clonrusk remnant bog.
My name is Larry Fulham. I'm from Rathangan in County Kildare. When I was about 8 years old, I spotted this box in a shop window locally, persuaded my parents to buy it for Christmas, was sent for music lessons to a band. The band was about 30 strong. I was one of 2 males, and after about 3 months I said, no, I'm not staying with all these girls. But word had leaked that we had the box, and every so often there'd be a knock at the door on a Saturday night, and someone from Borden Mona who can borrow the box to play in a local pub. And in fact, one of them dropped it one night and broke the silver kind of metal front on it, and created a new front by hand, and which I think gives a kind of a very distinct kind of look. Now, if you ask most people about Kildare, they'll assume you live on the Curragh or near the racecourse, But where I live in West Kildare, it's largely bog. And Bord na Móna have been a significant employer there for aeon. Bord na Móna brought lots of positives, but around the music, I could see that it also meant that people were drawn into a world where there was seriously heavy drinking. And I can think of at least two school friends whose fathers were heavy drinkers, and they were, when they went and played music, they were plied with drink rather than getting paid, and it had a very detrimental effect on the family. So while Bord na Móna brought lots of good stuff, there's also that downside, of the heavy drinking and the hard man culture that was associated with it as well. I belong to a group locally called Creative Rathangan Mehel, and since 2017 we were pulling at the idea of what came after Bord na Móna. At the time we thought it was 10 years, maybe 15 years away, and we were quite shocked in 2018 when the announcements came through that the end not only was coming, it had arrived. Then we had COVID, which kind of put a damper on lots of things. But having said that, there was thinking going on, and about 5 groups in Kildare all got together around what we would like our county development plan to look like. So looking at Kildare, you can see that there are 3 canals going through, and we had the idea that if you could lure people off the canals onto the old Bord na Móna railway lines, which would now be used as walkways, there could be some tourism benefit locally. I think things are optimistic, things are looking up. That's where we're at the moment.